Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav and we'll be learning today Mirz Hashem Daf Kuf Yud Beis Amid Beis as well as Daf Kuf Yud Gimel Amid Aleph, which will catch us up one day on the Dirshu schedule. So we are continuing to learn the halachas of the Daled Minim, and on Kuf Yud Beis Amid Beis we're going to conclude Siman Taf Reish Mem Hey that discusses Hilchas Lulav. We pick up on Kuf Yud Beis Amid Beis with Sif Tes. Says the Mechaber, Im Kafuf Beroshai, if the lulav is bent over at its top, puzzle, the lulav is puzzle. Now, we learned previously in Sif Ches, we learned the halacha of the lulav that is akoim. On the bottom line of Kuf Yud Beis Amid Aleph, we learned one of the psulim of lulav, Oishu akoim lefanav, sharei shedrai kegav balachat tetres. We learned about a lulav which is bent over, and we said that lulav could be puzzle. Now, by the way, here I have a new lulav to torture now, but I'm not going to be able to really do the lulav kafuf without breaking it, I think. But the lulav akoim that we spoke about in Sif Ches is a lulav that's bent in the middle, so that the whole lulav is misshapen. The whole lulav is bent over. And that's what we learned about. That's a lulav that's bent over like a hunchback. Over here, we're talking about a different psul. Now, I should mention, both of these psulim come from the Gemara in Sukkah. I believe it's on Daf Lamed Beis. Let me just pull it up over here. We have a brisa that speaks about a lulav kafuf, a lulav kavut, saduk, akaim, daim alamagal. So we have two different psulim. We have a psul of kafuf and a psul of akaim. So again, in Sif Ches we spoke about the psul of akaim, and that's the lulav that's really bent over like a hunchback. Here at Sif Tes, we're talking about a lulav that is kafuf beroshai, that's bent over at its top. Now, if you take a look at the Mishnah Berurah's Katan Lamed Ches, the Mishnah Berurah says, Hainu shahaya kafuf ka'agmoin. This means a lulav that's bent over like a fish hook. Now, I think you can see this on camera. Let me bring this a little bit closer to the camera so it's easier to see. We're going to do it here with one leaf. If you have a lulav that's bent over like a fish hook, so it's bent over like that. But we're talking about a lulav that's bent over at the top. It's not bent over in the center. That was the psul of Sif Ches. Now, the Mechaber continues over here, and he says, however, when we speak about this psul of the lulav kafuf, we're not talking about where the top of the leaf is bent over. We're talking about where the top of the shedra is bent over. Says the Mechaber, V'davka kishedrasai kefufa. This psul of kafuf is not talking about when the tips of the leaves at the top are bent over like a fish hook. We're talking about lower down on the lulav, where we have the shedra, where we can still get it closer to the camera, where we still have the shedra visible. Over there, it's bent over like a fish hook. That's this psul that we're speaking over here in Sif Tes. Now, what would be if the tip of the leaves are bent over? And many of us are familiar with that. We talk about a lulav that has a kneppel. When we speak about a lulav that has a kneppel, that's what we're talking about, where the tip of the leaves on top are bent over a little bit like a fish hook. But that's not the shedra being bent over, that's the leaf being bent over. So again, the Mechaber said, "Im kafuf beroshai," if the lulav is bent over at its top, puzzle, it's puzzle. And the Mechaber says, "V'davka kishedrasai kefufa." This psul only applies when the shedra, the spine of the lulav, is bent over. Aval olav kefufim, but if the leaves are bent beroshai at their tips, Kemoishe derech lihiyos harbe lulavim, which we find is the derech, that's the way many lulavim grow, then the Mechaber says that is kosher. Now let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. So again, I cut lamuches, the Chavetz Chaim said, kaf of peroshai, hainu shai, kaf of ka'agmoin. This is a reference to a lulav that's bent over like a fishhook, bein lefanav ubein la'achrav. And in this case of kafuf, it doesn't matter if the lulav is bent over towards the front, meaning opposite the shedra is facing you, and the lulav is bent over forward like a fishhook, or if it's bent over backward. In either case, that lulav would be puzzle. And the reason is because it's not hadar. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this lulav is puzzle, she'ein za hadar, because such a lulav is not hadar. Ois katan mem, kefufim. The Mechaber said, aval olav kefufim beroshai. If the leaves are bent over like a fishhook at their tops, then the Mechaber said that's kosher. Says the Mishnah Berurah, very interesting. For Rosh Kosav, the Rosh writes, not only is this lulav kosher, the Rosh says, Ohev ani yoser lotzei. Quite the opposite. Says the Rosh, I love to find a lulav with a knepel. Why? She'ein he'olin nechlokin, because when you have a lulav where the tips of the leaves are bent over, that reinforces the double leaf structure of the lulav, and then the leaves do not split. And let's remember, we spoke about the problem of nechlika hatiyomis. If the leaves split, we had the whole machlokes. Does it mean roiv of the leaves split? Does it mean only the tiyomis, the topmost, centermost leaf? But whatever it is, we don't want the leaves to split. So the Rosh says, when you have the lulav leaves bent over at their tips like a fishhook, that reinforces the leaves, and then the leaves are much less likely to split. So Rosh Kasav, Ohev ani yoser lotzei spay. I love to be yaitza the mitzvah of lulav with a lulav that has a knepel. Why? She'ena ola nechlakin, because then the leaves do not split. Utiyamtai kayemes, and the tiyamis remains intact. It has a tendency to stay together much better. That's the Rosh. The Kosav halavush, the Lavush writes in reference to this Rosh, and he says, "V'dafka kisheha'ela ha'elyoina levad kefufa." When the Rosh says that he likes to be yotzei the mitzvah of lulav, when the leaves on top are bent over, he doesn't mean all of the leaves. He means the tiyomis. The Rosh says, I like to use a lulav with a tiyomis. The topmost, centermost leaf has a knepel. Avo, however, says the Lavush, im kulan oiruban kifufim, if all of the leaves, or even roiv of the leaves, are bent over at their tops, kol shehu, even a tiny bit, puzzle, then the Lavush says that lulav would be puzzle, devadai zehu shinui mibriyasai, because that's a lulav mishuneh. If roiv of the leaves are bent over like fishhooks at their tops, or if all of the leaves are bent over like fishhooks at their tops, that's mishuneh, ve'ena hadar klal, and therefore that lulav is not hadar, and since it's not hadar, it's puzzle. So again, we have over here a mechaber. The mechaber says, if the shedra is bent over like a fishhook, that lulav is puzzle. That's the psul of lulav kafuf. If the leaves are bent over, and again, what are the words of the mechaber? Aval olav kifufim. If the leaves, lashon rabim, are bent over at their tips, beroshai, then the mechaber says it's kosher. We have a Rosh brought down here by the Mishnah Berurah who says not only is it kosher, I like to use a lulav where the leaves are bent over because it maintains the integrity of the leaves don't split. The Lavush says, when the Rosh says this, he doesn't mean that roiv of the leaves are bent over like fishhooks at their tips, or all of them. He means only the tiyomis. So says the Lavush. He says, but if they're all bent over, or roiv of them are bent over, that's mishunah, it's not hadar, and you shouldn't use it, it's puzzle. And the Magen Avram brings down this Rosh. However, V'das HaTaz, it's the opinion of the Taz, she'ein lechalik bazeh, that it's not logical to make this distinction that the Levush makes. The Taz says, when the Rosh says he likes to use a lulav where the leaves are bent over at the tips, he means even if all the leaves are bent over at the tips, that's also kosher. Not only that, but if you take a look at the Sharetzion Ois Cotton Mem, the Chavetz Chaim says, V'chein mashma pashtus ha-Shulchan Aruch. The language of the Shulchan Aruch sounds like the Taz's Taz's understanding of the Mechaber. Like I pointed out, the Mechaber says, Aval olav kifufim beroishai. If the leaves, Lashon Rabim, plural, if the leaves are bent over at the top, the lulav is kosher. So the pashtus of the Mechaber is like a simple understanding of the Rosh also. Even if all the leaves are bent over, even if they all have a kneppel, the lulav is kosher. Not only the centermost leaf, and the Taz says that that's really logical, because if anything, what we have found until now is that the tiyomis, the centermost, topmost leaf, is more chamur than the rest of the lulav. So, if the Levush seems to be very shver, the Levush is saying, the Rosh says, if the tiyomis has a kneppel, it's kosher. But if the other leaves, if roiv of the other leaves or all of the other leaves have a kneppel, it's puzzle. Says the Taz, that's not logical. We always find that the tiyomis is more chamer. So if you're telling me that if the tiyomis is bent over, it's okay, so then if roiv of the other leaves are bent over, it should also be okay. So the Taz says, she'en lechalik bazeh. But Chavetz Chaim says, V'al kol panim, b'de'ika acher, if you have another lulav, if you have one lulav where roiv of the branches, roiv of the leaves on top are bent over, or all of them are, and you have another lulav that's not that way, bevada yesh lizar shaloi lotzeis bazeh, you certainly should be mahader not to use this one, because you have shitas that hold that it's not good. Not to use this one, sherashei ha'olin kulam rubam kifufim. Ois Cotton Mem Aleph, the Mechaber said if the leaves are kfufim beroishai, v'dafka bazeh shalei nichpaf ela beroishai, v'nishar chelik godol beli kefifa. The Chavetz Chaim is pointing out like this. He's saying, when does the Mechaber say that if the tops of the leaves are bent over, that's okay? That's when it's the top of the leaf. Let me see if I can get the lulav closer to the camera. Okay. If the top of the leaf is bent over like a fish hook, let me pick one leaf. Okay. I guess you can see that over there. If the top of the leaf is bent over, that's what the Mechaber says is okay. But let's say it's not the top of the leaf. Let's read the Mishnah Berurah. When does the Mechaber say it's okay? That's when only the tip is bent over. But the majority of the leaf is fine. It's nice and straight. It's just the tip that's bent. Aval, however, but let's say you have a situation like this. I'll pick these leaves. Let's say you have this situation where it's not just the tip of the leaf that's bent over. You have a nice portion of the leaf that's bent down towards its middle. So that it looks like the leaf is mamish doubled over. Puzzle. Then the lulav is puzzle. She'ein zeh hadar klal, because certainly we cannot call that mahudar. That is not hadar, and it is puzzle. V'hu adin im ha'olah ha'elyona ha'emtzais she'atiyuma nichpa falavada harbe la'amtziisa gamkein puzzle. So too says the Chavetz Chaim, if the tiyomis, if the centermost, topmost leaf is bent over like it's bent double, it's not just a little kneppel at the top, it's mamish bent over, that would also be puzzle. Ice cotton membeis, kosher. If the leaves are bent at the tips, it's kosher. However, there are poskim that are machbar on this halacha. Nevertheless, haminig lahakel ka Shulchan Aruch. The minig is to be makel like the Shulchan Aruch. V'ayin b'shari tshuva. There's a lengthy shari tshuva here that goes through various shitas on this question. So again, if I wanted to summarize Sif Tes, what I would say is like this. There is a psul of kafuf. The psul of kafuf is if the shedra of the lulav is bent over like a fishhook. So the lulav is deformed. It's not just a question of the tips of the leaves. If the tips of the leaves are bent over, then the Mechaber says that's okay. Now we have this question here in the Mishnah Berurah, where we say that a knepel at the top is okay. Is that even if roiv of the leaves have knepels on them, or if all of the leaves have knepels on them? The Levush says no. The Levush says if they all have it, that's a deformity in the lulav. The lulav is not hadar, and we shouldn't use that lulav. The Rush, the Mechaber, they seem to imply, even if all of the leaves have a little kneplach on top, that's okay. The Mishnah Berurah seems to come out over here that certainly if we have a lulav where roiv of the leaves or all of the leaves have a knepel, and we have a choice to use a different lulav, we should use a different lulav. Okay, that is Kuf Yud Beis, Amid Beis. Now we go to Kuf Yud Gimel, Amid Aleph, and we begin Siman Taf Reish Mem Vav. Dine Hadas, the halachas that apply to the Hadasim, Uba Yud Aleph Seifim, and here we have 11 Seifim. Says the Mechaber in Sif Aleph, Hadas sheniktam roishai kosher. If you have a hadas where the top of the hadas was chopped off, that hadas is kosher. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Aleph, sheniktam roishai. What does it mean that the top of the hadas was chopped off? Hainu ha'etz. It means the actual branch of the hadas was chopped off at top. Aval ba'ole lechud. But if the leaves of the hadas, you have a perfectly intact hadas, and the top row of the leaves, the tips of the leaves were chopped off, or maybe even some of the leaves at the top of the lulav are missing entirely, right? In that case, says the Mishnah Berurah, lo shaykh klal niktam roishai, that wouldn't even be a shaila of niktam roishai. So what the Mishnah Berurah is saying is, when the Mechaber comes along and he says a chidush, that a hadas sheniktam roisha is kosher, he means that the top of the branch itself was chopped off. He's not talking about where the leaves at the top of the hadas were damaged. That's certainly not an issue. I didn't even have to tell you that. Okay, we're going to see that halacha later on in this Siman in Sif Yud in a Ramah. Now let's remember that by the lulav, it's a little bit different. Because by the lulav, when we talk about the top of the lulav being chopped off, we talk about the top of the leaves of the lulav being chopped off as well. Right? We had it Sivav in the Mechaber. The Mechaber said on Kuf Yud Beis Amid Aleph Sivav, Niktam Roishai, if the top of the lulav was chopped off, and the Mechaber said, Dahainu sheniktabu roiv ha'olin ha'elyonim, if the upper leaves, if roiv of the upper leaves had their tops chopped off. Over there, we're not talking about the branch of the lulav itself, we're not talking about the shedra, we're talking about the leaves. And niktam roishai becomes a problem. By the hadas, niktam roishai applies to the branch, not to the leaves. Okay. Ice cut base in the Mishnah Berurah kosher. So the hadas where the top of the branch was chopped off is kosher. Says the Mishnah Berurah that this really is a little bit of an odd line in the Mechaber. Why? Says the Chavetz Chaim, ayin lekamon b'sif yud, because as we go through Siman Taf Reish Mem Vav, we're going to come to Sif Yud, shemevi machloikis bazeh. We're actually going to find in Sif Yud that it's not so pashut, that if the top of the branch of the hadas was chopped off, the hadas is still kosher. It's actually a machloikis. Lefi sheshnei seifim arishonim elu hu lashon Rambam. The Chavetz Chaim is explaining, why did the Ramah write this? Why did the Mechaber write this way? The Mechaber seems to write a statement, a fixed statement. Hadas sheniktam roisha kosher. A hadas where the top of the branch was chopped off is kosher. Says Mishnah Berurah, not so fast. In Sif Yud, it's actually a machlokes. So why does the Mechaber write it this way? Explains the Mishnah Berurah, Lefi sheshnei seifim harishonim elu, Sif Aleph and Sif Beis are Lashon HaRambam. These are direct quotes from the Rambam. Umin Sif Gimel ve'elech hu lashon HaTorah. The way the Mechaber structured this Siman Taf Reish Mem Vav, Sif Aleph, Sif Beis, quotations from the Rambam. Beginning in Sif Gimel, the Mechaber starts to quote the Torah, where the Torah actually is mefarish some of the things that the Rambam said. So yes, in Sif Aleph, we're going with the das of the Rambam, hadas sheniktam roishay kosher. Later on in Sif Yud, we're going to go with the Torah, and we're going to hear from the Torah that it's not so fast. There are those that disagree with this Rambam. So the Nimshach Kan Achar Lashon Rambam. Here, the Mechaber is following the language of the Rambam. Agav Sha'ar Hadinim, together with the other halachas that the Mechaber writes here in Sif Aleph and in Sif Beis. Let's continue with the Mechaber. And again, we're going to read this Mechaber. It's a little bit tricky, though, how to read this. Says the Mechaber, Noshru Roiv Olav. Let's say the majority of the leaves of the hadas fell off. Noshru Roiv Olav. Most of the leaves fell off. Im nishtairu shloisha olin bekain echad. If there are 3 leaves left intact. Now, literally, what the Mechaber says here is bekain echad, in one cane. What's a cane? A cane is a base, is a foundation. Kinesher yo'ir kinoi in Parshas Ha'azinu, like an eagle arouses its nest. What's a nest? A nest is the base of the eagles, of the birds. I'm trying to remember where the pasuk is. There's another pasuk. It's a Rashi. It's a Rashi in Hazinu that just struck me. It's a pasuk. Hal Hashem tigmalu zayis am nova v'loy chacham. When you rebel against the Rabbeinu Shalom Chas v'Chalila, Hal Hashem tigmalu zayis. You're doing this to the Rabbeinu Shalom. Am novel v'loy chacham, a foolish nation, not a wise nation. Haloihu avicha kanecha. He is your forefather, kanecha, kuf nun chaf. What does that mean, kanecha? Says Rashi, shekanacha, shekinencha, b'kein aslam ube'eretz chazaka, shetikencha b'chamine takana. Shekanacha, shekinencha, b'kein aslam. The Rabbeinu Shalom set you up, he established you on a firm foundation. So a cane is a base or a foundation. When we use the word cane in relation to hadassim, what we're referring to is at each level on the hadas, there is a bud that serves as the cane, the foundation, for the leaves that protrude from that bud. So the Mechaber says here like this, Nashru Raiv Olav, if the majority of the leaves of the hadas fell off, Im nishtairu shloisha olin bekain echad, if there remains 3 leaves coming from one base, coming from one bud, kosher, the hadas is kosher. Now again, a simple reading of this Mechaber sounds like you have a hadas branch, the vast majority, the majority of the leaves have fallen off. So you have almost no leaves here. But you have one cane, you have one place where the hadas is mishulish, where you have 3 leaves, that lulav is kosher. That's not what the Mechaber means. That would be an improper reading of the Mechaber, an improper translation of the Mechaber. Let's take a look right away at Mishnah Berurah, is Gimel. Mishnah Berurah says, Noshru Roiv Olav, if most of the branches fell off. Says the Mishnah Berurah, we're speaking about a very specific case over here. Hainu, the case that we're discussing is, Shahaya b'chol kain v'kain, by each bud, by each foundation of the hadas, at each level of the hadas, hayoytze mimenu shiva olin. We talk about a hadas mishulish. We had a hadas over here that wasn't mishulish. It didn't have 3 leaves at every level. It had 7 leaves at every level. V'nashru mehen arba. and 4 leaves have fallen off at each level of the hadas. So the hadas had 10 different levels. It had 10 different kinim, 10 different buds along its branch. At every one, it had 7 leaves. That's 70 leaves. 40 leaves have fallen off. 4 leaves fell off from each cane. Now, instead of having a hadas that had 7 leaves at every bud, now we have a hadas mishulish. Now we have a hadas that has 3 leaves at every bud. But we also have a hadas that has lost the majority of its leaves. The Mechaber is saying, is that a problem? Is it a chesaron in the hadas if the hadas lost most of its leaves? Says the Mechaber, no, that's not a problem. Let's go back to the Mechaber now and read it in the Mechaber. Nashru roiv olav. If you have a hadas where the majority of the leaves fell off, because this hadas had 7 leaves at every level, and it lost 4 at each level. So it lost the majority of its leaves. Says the Mechaber, the halacha is, Im nishtayru shloisha olin b'kein echad, if at each one of the kinim, it doesn't mean at one level, it means at every one of the levels, Im nishtayru shloisha olin b'kein echad, if you still have 3 leaves coming out from one bud at each level of the hadas, kosher, the hadas is still kosher. And we see this inside of the Mishnah Berurah. Again, I'm going to read from Mishnah Berurah's Kat Gimel. Hainu shahaya b'chol kain v'kain hayotzi mimenu shiva olin. Each bud had 7 leaves. V'nashru mehen arba. And each one of them lost 4 leaves. Kevan shenishtayir shloisha olin. Since each one still has 3. Adayin nikra eitz avos. This is still called an eitz avos. We'll explain what that means in a minute. The kosher and the hadas is kosher, ukidlakaman b'sif dalid, like we're going to discuss further in sif dalid. Ois dalid in the Mishnah Berurah b'kain echad. The Mechaber says there's still 3 leaves at one cane. Explains the Mishnah Berurah that means haynu b'chol kain v'kain mimenu. There's 3 leaves coming out from one cane at each one of the kinim, at each level on the hadas. Now, how do we know that that's the way we should learn the Mechaber? The Mechaber doesn't sound that way. A simple reading of the Mechaber sounds like Nashru roiv olav. The hadas lost the majority of its leaves. Im nishtayru shloisha alin b'kein echad. As long as you have one level, you have one cane somewhere on the hadas that has 3 leaves, the hadas is kosher. Well, the answer is, let's go right back to the Gemara. This comes from Daf Lamed Beis Amud Beis in Sukkah. What does the Gemara say? The Gemara says like this. Tanu Rabbanon. We have a brisa. This is the bottom of Lamed Beis Amud Beis. Nashru roiv olav. If the majority of the leaves fell off of the hadas, v'nishtayru by miut, and you have a minority of the leaves left intact, kosher. The hadas is kosher. So you have a hadas, it lost the majority of the leaves, you still have a minority of the leaves, the hadas is kosher. Continues the brisa, however, there's a caveat. Ubelvad, this is only true, shetehei avoisai kayemes. The avoisai, the avos nature of the hadas has to remain intact. What does this mean? We know that the pasuk refers to the hadas as the anaf eitz avos, a branch of an eitz avos. What does avos mean? Avos means woven, braided, plaited, P-L-A-I-T-E-D. Plaited and braided are very, very similar. They both connote where the branch of the hadas has an appearance of something which is woven together or braided together. Because on each level we have 3 leaves and they overlap the level above it. And that one overlaps the level above that. Can you see the branch of the hadas? Not really. It's covered over by this woven, braided, or plaited covering of the leaves. So what this brisa is saying is like this. Nashru roiv olav, if the majority of the leaves fell off, v'nishtayru by miut, but you still have a minority of the leaves, kosher, the hadas is kosher, but ubilvad shetei avoisai kayemes, but the plaited or braided nature of the hadas still has to be intact. Now that's very hard to imagine. If you have a branch of a hadas that has lost the majority of its leaves, how is it still avos? How is it still plaited or braided? Most of the leaves are missing. Now you have a bare branch. In a lot of the hadas, you should have a bare branch. And the Gemara asks that kasha on the brisa. Frek the Gemara, hagufa kasha. This seems to be intrinsically shver. This doesn't make any sense. Amrit, on the one hand, you said nashru roiv olav kasher. On the one hand, you're telling me if the majority of the leaves fell off the hadas is kosher. V'hadar tani, and then you're telling me but the plaited nature of the hadas has to remain intact. How could that be? Kevan de nasri lehu trei avos. Kevan de nasri lehu trei. If we imagine a typical hadas that's mishulish, that has 3 branches, 3 leaves on every level, and you're telling me most of the leaves fell off, that means 2 leaves fell off on every level, it's not avos anymore. So how do we understand this brisa? You're telling me roiv of the leaves fell off, it's kosher, but in order for it to be kosher, it still has to be avos, it still has to be plated. How is that possible? If 2 branches fell off at every level of 3, it's no longer avos. So the Gemara answers, Amar Abaya. Abaya explains, Mishkachas la ba'asa mitzra'ah. We're talking about the type of hadas that would grow on the border of a field. The border of a field is positioned a little bit away from the crops. You don't plant the crops all the way up to the border. So at the border, whatever grows at the border does not have stiff competition for water and for nutrients, and it grows very healthy and very strong. Therefore, ba'asa mitzrah, we're talking about a hadas that grew on the border. Dekaimi shiva bechad kina. And since it's such a strong hadas, it has 7 leaves at every level. Dechinasri arba. So now if it loses most of its leaves, it means it loses 4 leaves at every level. Pashaluhu tlasa. So you still have 3 at every level. And if you still have 3 at every level, it's still avos, because 3 leaves is enough to cover the branch. So here I read to you a Gemara from Lamed Beis, Amud Beis in Sukkah, and that's exactly what the Mechaber is telling me here in Sif Aleph. Nashru roiv olav. You had a hadas that had 7 leaves at each level. The majority fell off. That means 4 fell off at each level. Im nishtayru shloisha alin b'kein echad. If you still have 3 leaves at each cane, and the point being that now it's still anaf eitz avos, because the branch is still covered by 3 leaves at every level, kosher, the hadas is kosher. So there we have a beautiful Gemara, and we see now how the Mechaber over here flows from the Gemara, and how the explanation of the Mishnah Berurah is based very clearly on that Gemara, on Lamed Beis, Amud Beis. Okay. Excuse me 1 second. Now we go to Sif Beis. It is the nature of hadasim that sometimes they grow berries. Says the Mechaber, Hayu anavav merubais me'olav. Let's say you have a hadas and it's full of berries, and there are actually more berries than there are leaves. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Hayu anavav delapa'amim gadal ala hadas pri. Sometimes the hadas sprouts a fruit, a berry, kimin anava, that is similar to a grape. So the Mechaber says here, Hayu anavav merubais me'olav, if you had more berries than you had leaves. So then the Mechaber says like this, Im yerakos, if those berries are green, then kosher. Then the hadas is still kosher. V'im adumois oishchayros, however, if they are red or they're black, puzzle, then this hadas is puzzle. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Vav, Im yerakos kosher. If the berries are green, then even if you have more berries than leaves, the hadas is still kosher. Why? The gam hadas yaroiku, because the leaves of the hadas are also green. So you have green leaves, you have green anovim, green berries. It's okay. Ve'ein shinoi mare machmas ha'anovim. The presence of the green berries does not detract from the appearance of the hadas. We're assuming that you have a hadas that meets all the other requirements. It's an anaf eitz avos. It has the proper amount of leaves in the proper positions, but it also has a lot of berries, and it has more berries than it has leaves. Since they're green, and the leaves are also green, the presence of the berries does not detract from the beauty of the hadas, and therefore it's kosher. Continues the Chavetz Chaim, ma she'ein kein b'shchayros. However, that's not true if they're black. If the berries are black, now you have a beautiful green hadas with black berries all over it. That detracts from the beauty of the hadas, and now the hadas is not kosher. Continues the Chavetz Chaim, the Mechaber mentioned red berries and black berries. The Gama Dumois Havu Shchayros. You should know that the red berries are considered to be similar to blackberries. The Amrinon, because we know that we say in regards to Hilchas Nida, Hai Shachar, when we have a mare that is black, Adamhu, it's really red, Ela Shalaka. The black is a form of red. So black is a form of red is a form of black. So blackberries, red berries, they're both problematic. So Avaladuma, so Shchayros, puzzle. Therefore, if you have red berries or blackberries, it's puzzle, the Lulav hadarhu, because this detracts from the beauty of the hadas. The hadas is no longer hadar, and that's why the hadas is puzzle. Vim hayushar givanim, let's say the berries are different colors. Kigagel, like yellow, or blue, they're blue. Bekapis tamarim mitzadeh, the Sefer Kapis tamarim leans to say lahachmir, that you should be stringent and you should not use such a hadas. Pri begadim mistapik bazeh, the Pri Megadim wonders whether or not that is so. Now, if we take a look at the Sharat Tzion, Ois Katan Daled, there's a very interesting Sharat Tzion here. Now, the Mishnah Berurah said, the reason the Mechaber says that green berries are okay, blackberries and red berries are bad, is because it's an issue of hadar. Green doesn't take away from hadar because it blends in with the hadas. Black and red take away from hadar. Says the Sharat Tzion here, this is taken from Rashi on Daf Yud Aleph Amid Beis. Now, says the Chavetz Chaim, Umina Yerushalmi mashma, you take a look at the Yerushalmi seems to have a different pshat. L'chayre b'maskanasai, Umina Yerushalmi mashma l'chayre b'maskanasai, in its conclusion, the Yerushalmi seems to say, the ikaratam de b'shchayros ay adumais, the actual reason why blackberries or red berries render the hadas puzzle is because kfar nigmar peryon. It's because the derech of the hadas is that when the berries are unripe, they're green. When the berries ripen, they turn black or red. So if you have a hadas that has black or red berries, that's a hadas that already bears mature fruit. HaTorah amra ulekachtem anaf. The Torah HaTorah says that for the hadas, you want an anaf eitz avos, a branch of an eitz. It's a twig. V'loy pri, you're not supposed to be bringing peros. Now, if you have a branch that has mature peros on it, those berries are already choshev, they're mature. So it's hard to say that what you're doing is you're bringing a twig, you're bringing peros. I would say that the peros are the ikr. When an apple, what's an apple tree? An apple tree is called an apple tree because the ikr of the tree is the apples, right? You don't call it a tree, an agav that happens to have apples. So if you have a hadas branch that already has mature fruit, that doesn't seem to be what the Torah HaTorah wants. The Torah HaTorah wants anaf eitz avos. The focus is on the plated hadas branch, not fruits. So green is okay because it's immature. We don't worry about the fruit. Red or black is already mature fruit. That we don't want. The immature berry is green. Then it dries up, matures, it turns black. Now, the Sharat Tzion points out that there's an interesting nafkamina in whether you go with the Yerushalmi's understanding of the psul or Rashi and the Bavli's understanding of the psul. V'im derech hadas hazeh legadol peiros yerukin dahainu af bigmoron. Let's say you would have a species of hadas where the mature berry remains green. According to the Yerushalmi, that hadas would be puzzle because it's a hadas branch that has a mature peri on it. According to Rashi in the Bavli, that hadas would be echt kosher. It's fine, there's nothing wrong with it. It's a green berry, so it blends in and it doesn't detract from the appearance of the hadas. Lefizer pasal af biyerukin. According to the Yerushalmi, if the mature berry would be green, that hadas would be puzzle. Achen bebavli damasik de bishum de yeraka ismina de hadasu mashma de tayvus atam k'may she'omer Yerushalmi b'tchila mishum de einay damis la'etzai. It seems, says the Chavetz Chaim, that the Bavli is not going with this pshat of the Yerushalmi. And if we skip down to the bottom line here, that's why the Mishnah Berurah doesn't make any chiluk, any differentiation. The Mechaber just says straight out, green berries are okay. Even if it's a species of hadas where the mature berries are green, it's still okay. Because we're going like this Rashi in the Bavli. Okay. Now let's go weiter in the Mechaber. So the Mechaber said so far over here in Sif Beis that if you have more berries than you have leaves, so then it depends. If they're green, it's kosher, and we explained because it doesn't detract from the hadar, it doesn't detract from the appearance because the berries blend in. If, however, you have black berries or red berries, and there are more berries than there are leaves, then the hadas is going to be puzzled because it detracts from the appearance, and now it's no longer hadar. Now let's go into the Shulchan Aruch, third line down by the Ois Katan Zayin for the Mishnah Berurah. How about v'im miaton? Let's say you picked the berries off. So you had a hadas branch that had more red or black berries than leaves, so it's puzzle, but you picked off the berries. And now there's more leaves than there are berries. So now it's kosher, says the Mechaber, v'im miaton. If you make less the berries, kosher, then the hadas is kosher. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Zayin, v'im miatan, haynu me erev Yom Tov. You would have to pluck those berries before Yom Tov. Umuter l'mayto yisod l'chatchila k'dei shiyu olav merubais me'anavav. And you could do this even l'chatchila. Don't think that pshat is, it's a pasal of hadas and you're trying to make kunsen to make the hadas kosher. No, it's perfectly okay. The whole problem over here is that if you have more black or red berries than you have green leaves, it detracts from the beauty of the hadas. If you pluck the berries off, it's a beautiful hadas. But you have to do it, says the Chavetz Chaim, me erev Yom Tov. Va'afilu lamata basa da'agen al-lulav. And you could even pluck those berries off after you already tied the hadassim to the lulav. You tied the hadassim to the lulav. Somebody points out to you that you have a problem. You could go pluck them, but you must pluck them on erev Yom Tov. And the reason why you have to pluck it on erev Yom Tov, let's jump right back into the Mechaber, 3 lines down. Ve'ein mematim oisam b'Yom Tov. You're not allowed to pluck those berries on Yom Tov. Now, many of you are thinking, of course, Rabbi Weiss, you're not allowed to pluck the berries on Yom Tov because that would be a tolda, that would be like kaitzer. It would be like harvesting. No, that's not the reason. Says the Mechaber, you can't pluck them on Yom Tov l'fi kishehu k'misakein. The reason you're not allowed to do it is because this is a problem of tikkun moneh. This is a problem of fixing a keli. It's a problem of the malach of makeh b'patish. Because first you had a pasal, a hadas, and now you plucked off the berries and you turned it into a kosher hadas. That's makeh b'patish. That's misakin moneh. Over here it would be an issa d'Rabbanan, not an issa d'Oraisa. But there's no problem of kaitzer because the hadas is already detached from the ground. There's no kaitzer problem of picking berries off a branch that's already separated from the ground. Now, continues the Mechaber. So what did we see? You have a hadas branch that has more black or red berries than green leaves. Problem, puzzle. Why? Because it's not hadar. You want to pluck the berries and make less berries than there are leaves? You could do that, lechatchila, no problem. You got to do it on erev Yom Tov. You can't do it on Yom Tov because if you do it on Yom Tov, it's tikkun moneh. Now, says the Mechaber near the end of the 3rd line down, avar v'likton. Let's say the person did something that he was not supposed to do. On Yom Tov, he went and he plucked the berries. Or, says the Mechaber, shelikton echad echad. Now, in the Mishnah Berurah, we're going to see that they changed the girsa over here. They changed the text. It should not say oy shelikton echad echad. Instead, it should say oy shelikton acher. Or somebody else plucked the berries, la'achila, because he wanted to eat them. Harezek kosher, this hadas is now kosher. So again, the Mechaber gives us two cases over here. He says, if you pluck the berries off, you make the hadas kosher. You're not allowed to pluck the berries off on Yom Tov, because to pluck the berries off on Yom Tov would be masakin moneh. It would be a problem of makib patish. But let's say you were an avarian. You went ahead and you plucked them anyway. Okay, the hadas is kosher. You weren't supposed to pluck them, but you plucked them, the hadas is kosher. Or, let's say somebody else plucked them, and he didn't pluck them in order to make the hadas a kosher hadas. He didn't care about the hadas. He plucked them because they looked tasty, and he wanted to eat them. So if somebody went ahead and plucked them in order to eat them, not in order to be mesakin in the hadas, then, says the Mechaber, the lulav is kosher. Now let's take a look at a very interesting Mishnah Berurah here. Mishnah Berurah is katan ches. Oy sheliktan echad echad la'achila. Again, the text as we have it from the Mechaber is you pluck them one at a time for eating purposes. Echad echad. Says the Mishnah Berurah, we have to change the text. Ayin betaz v'hagra. The Mishnah Berurah says, take a look at the taz and the gra. Sheheskimu, who reach a consensus. The tzarich laimar, that the text has to be amended over here, and it should say oy shelikton acher, or somebody else picked the berries la'achila for eating purposes. So take out the words echad echad and replace them with acher. V'chein hiskim Magen Avram, and the Magen Avram agrees with that emendation ledina halacha lemaisa. The dafke ish acher shelikton la'achila. It's only when somebody else, not the owner of the hadas, not the one who's going to use the hadas, somebody else plucked the berries for eating purposes, ve'enoi miskaven lahachshiroi, and he had no intent to be misakin the hadas, he wasn't trying to be makshir the hadas, mutter, then it's mutter. Again, I just want to be very clear what we're speaking about here. You see, when you read the Mechaber, with the emendation of the Taz, the Mechaber gives us two cases. One is avar v'likton. You transgressed an isser. You are not supposed to pick the berries on Yom Tov because that's makib patish. Avar v'likton, if you transgressed that isser and you did pluck them, or, says the Mechaber, you didn't transgress anything, or somebody else plucked them in order to eat them. So, says the Mishnah Berurah over here, when do we have one case where you're an avarian? When do we have one case which is avar v'likton, when you transgressed an isser, and one case where nobody transgressed an isser? That's only when it was acher. That's only when somebody else, not the one who's going to use the hadas, plucked it for achila. But if the one who's going to use the hadas plucks it for achila, even though he had no intent to be makshir the hadas, he is an avarian. That would also be avar v'likton. The person who wants to use the hadas cannot use a trick and say, I'm going to pluck the berries in order to eat them. No, that would be asur. Even if you have no intent of tikkun moneh, that would still be asur. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah inside. Dafke ish acher shelikton la'achila. It's only when somebody else plucked the berries in order to eat them. Ve'enoi miskaven lahachshiroi, and he had no intent to be machshir the hadas, mutter, that's when it's mutter. Now, there's a strong reason to think it should be asur. What's that? Afagav the psik reishahu. It's a psik reisha. It's very nice that this person is picking the berries in order to eat them, but it's a psik reisha. Automatically, by picking the berries, he is going to be makshir the hadas, and he is going to be over on makib patish, right? So afagav the psik reishahu the memela mukshar hare lo nichale beheksharahu. The person who's not using the hadas, this is a psik reisha de lo nichale. It's a psik reisha that he doesn't get any benefit out of. And it's a psik reisha de lo nichale on a derabanan. We're not talking about a deraisa here. because we're not actually fixing a keli. We're being makshir a hadas halachically for use as daled minim. This is a tikkun mana derabanan. So you have a psik reisha de loy nichele by a derabanan. That's when this is okay. Hare loy nichele by aksharahu. He doesn't care about the fact that he's being makshir the hadas. He just wants to eat the berries. The kevan and even though, according to many shitas, we wouldn't be makel on a psik reisha de loy nichele, even by tikkun mana derabanan. Normally we would be machmir, but over here we're going to be makel. Why? The kevan de lebesayf ye tayelos bazel adam acher sheye yochel lotzeis behen yidei mitzvah. Since by virtue of this person picking the berries to eat them, the hadas will now be usable for somebody else to be yotza a mitzvah, we look away from the psik reisha de loy nichele by tikkun mana derabanan. Normally we wouldn't look away, but since the end result over here that somebody's going to be able to be yotza a mitzvah with this hadas, we're makel. Loy machmirina bazeh. Ma she'ein kain oisay ha'ish gufa. But the person who wants to use the hadas himself, he cannot go ahead and pick the berries la'achila and say, nah, I'm not doing tikkun mana. I'm just picking berries la'achila. No. Afimu mechaven la'achila v'loy la'achshirai. The person himself, even though his intent is la'achila and not to be makshir the hadas, mikal makam osir, this would still be osir the psik reishu, because it's a psik reishu makabapatish, and it's a psik reishu the nichele. Now it's good for him. He's going to get a hadas out of it. Unless he has 25 hadas, but he doesn't need this hadas. Then it's not a psik reishu the nichele. Okay, let's go weiter in the Mechaber. Let's finish with Siv Beis here. Let's go to the Ramah. Umiyayim rishain ve'elech, after the first day of Yom Tov, says the Ramah, kosher b'chol inyan. This whole psul of the berries on the hadas, says the Ramah, is only a problem on the first day of Yom Tov. After the first day of Yom Tov, when daled minim is derabanan, kosher b'chol inyan, the hadas is fine the way it is. You don't have to pluck the berries at all. Ice cut test kosher b'chol inyan. What the Ramah wants to say is, afilu loy miaton klal. Even if you don't pluck any berries, you have blackberries, red berries, more berries than leaves, it doesn't matter. After the first day, the hadas is kosher. The Tanoi, the rationale of the Ramah is, the Svirale, the Ramah holds, the chola psulin, all of these psulin that we're going to discuss here, afilu oisam she psulin misham hadar, even the psulin where the hadas is possible because of a lack of hidur, gam kein psulan hu rak b'yom rishon. The Ramah holds that those psulim are only negay on the first day of Yom Tov. Well, if he's there, and according to that rationale, Lididan, according to us, the Paskina Lekaman b'Siman Tafresh Mem Tes, where we're going to see later on in Siman Tafresh Mem Tes, the Psulin Machmas Hadar Psulin Kol Shiva, we hold that anything that's puzzled by the daled minim because of a lack of hidur is puzzled all Yom Tov, even after the first day. We don't paskin like this Ramah. Gam bazeh psulon kol shiva. This psul of the berries would be negeya all 7 days of Sukkot. Okay? Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. I'm glad that we caught up a day on the schedule after losing a few days. We're not that far behind. We're a few days behind, but we just caught up a day now, and hopefully we'll catch up to the Dirshu schedule in short order. Thank you for joining me for limud HaTorah. The source of limud HaTorah should be begging against Klal Yisrael. The Ramah should said Yeshua Sefurus and Parnassus to all those in need, and we should be zeichet to see the Bias Gal Tzedek. Amen. Be well.